from the onset of symptom to mortality is only 3 to 4 years, maximum 5 years. So, but the usually it is asymptomatic for a long period because of the concentric, the hypertrophic changes which go on and which is able to pump out very effectively the blood required. Only after a certain stage when this compensation becomes, sort of the balance. The balance is there for some time. After that, this hypertrophy will become back to the heart itself, and the diastolic component will reduce, and at the same time, because of the hypertrophy, the oxygen may not be oxygen cannot reach the subendocardium. So first endocardial ischemia can develop, and that is the stage when left ventricular dysfunction can start occurring, and by that time usually the symptoms start appearing very rapidly. In fact, when the onset of symptom itself, usually when they're planning for any surgical intervention, they say the onset of symptom itself is enough for planning for any intervention procedure. So that important is your onset of symptom in aortic stenosis. Now, what are the causes for aortic stenosis?
Subvalvular, valvular, and supravalvular.
Yeah, supravalvular, subvalvular, and it can be a valvular. Supravalvular, what is the syndrome?
Williams syndrome.
Yes, Williams syndrome, where you will have a hypercalcemia with a aortic stenosis with some congenital deformities. Then valvular, what are the causes?
Calcification.
One, calcification, so old age, atherosclerotic. Then
Rheumatic, ma'am.
rheumatic heart disease, very important. Then
Bicuspid.
bicuspid aortic valve. Then what are the other rare causes can be? Okay, subvalvular causes.
HOCM.
HOCM, ma'am.
HOC, very good. So these are the few causes. So whenever we classify, so it can be a supravalvular, valvular, and subvalvular. Supravalvular is your Williams syndrome and your congenital supravalvular aortic stenosis. Commonest is your valvular, where senile degeneration, rheumatic heart disease, and bicuspid aortic valve. In our country, still rheumatic heart disease is a common cause, but it is in the because we are better off. Like previously, it was only rheumatic, which was very common, but now we see more cases of senile degeneration, atherosclerotic, and bicuspid aortic valve. Usually, what happens is bicuspid aortic valve may either be asymptomatic, or the persons actually what they have done is an aortic stenosis patient, when they have taken post-mortem evaluation of all the valvular lesion, they have found that bicuspid is as common as 50 to 60%, but usually they become symptomatic only in 20%. What they say is the presence of bicuspid, presence of only two cusps makes them more prone for all the shears and stress, and they have a premature calcification, atherosclerotic change, and they may land up with aortic stenosis. But clinically, usually if it is a bicuspid aortic valve, what is the age of presentation of aortic stenosis due to bicuspid aortic valve?
Less than 45 years.
Yeah, usually less than 45 years, but usually in the adolescent age group, that is the usually will be presentation. In fact, if the question is asked which congenital heart disease presents in the age of 15 to 20, that is an adolescent age group, your answer should be your bicuspid aortic valve. If there is a bicuspid aortic valve, what is the other congenital abnormalities which can be associated, not related to heart only?
Turner syndrome, ma'am.
Turner syndrome, they are more prone for dash, bicuspid and dash.
Coarctation of
aorta. So in other words, in any patient with bicuspid aortic valve, unless you carefully look for coarctation of aorta, you may miss it. So if there is a bicuspid aortic valve, look for coarctation. So this is the way you should correlate about the bicuspid aortic valve. Subvalvular, of course, HOCM, as rightly pointed out, and this membranous diaphragm. So now the most common thing is your senile aortic stenosis. So what happens, what they say is, see, at risk, as I told, no, this bicuspid aortic valve itself becomes a risk for, premature atherosclerotic changes. And so they say there is a genetic background. like for when you see when we spoke about the bicuspid aortic valve, we said in Turner syndrome. What they say is it is genetic, and there is a question mark whether it is X-linked, but that is what they say about this bicuspid aortic valve leading on to your premature senile aortic stenosis. Then this risk valve morphology, of course, bicuspid. Then genotyping, there is some genetic background. Usually there is a cluster in the same family is seen. So there is always a genetic background. Then others we know as older age group, more atherosclerotic, and definitely male sex. Okay, usually 2/3 are males and only 1/3 are female. Even if you come to the ward, most of the case of aortic stenosis, except in rheumatic heart disease. Rheumatic heart disease is the only condition where females are more common than males, but otherwise, in aortic stenosis, 2/3 will only be males. Then, of course, dyslipidemia, diabetes and metabolic syndrome, that is any risk factor for atherosclerosis, will also lead on to this aortic stenosis. Then hypertension, smoking, your renal insufficiency, and increased serum phosphate, that is the calcium phosphate metabolism, when there is some imbalance which is going on. So this happens. Then next, what happens? But what it is not that everybody, that is, this is the inflammatory process is increased because of all this, but there is some trigger that the disease initiation starts. Now this is the phase of aortic sclerosis. If you come to the ward and auscultate, most of the patient about 65 or something, you may hear a ejection systolic murmur, but it will not be radiation will be very mild. Otherwise, you will not have any signs of aortic stenosis. We call that as aortic sclerosis. When you take an echo, the ejection fraction will be normal. There will be no other changes, echo suggestive of aortic stenosis. At this stage, we call it as aortic sclerosis. But in a patient with aortic sclerosis, we have to follow it up carefully, because they are the 10 to 15% of such patients may go for progressive disease, and there is even incidence of sudden cardiac death, but it is only 10 to 15%. So in the wards, when you come for your routine clinics, you will be seeing cases of aortic sclerosis. But aortic stenosis, only 10 to 15% of this group is going to go to progressive disease. So here what happens is there is shear stress, because it has started stiffening, inflammatory process starts, there is a lipid infiltration, and myofibroblast differentiation. But at this stage also, it is only sclerosis. There is my ejection systolic murmur, but it's not enough to cause systemic changes, and it never lands up with any symptoms. But they are prone, that is 10 to 15% may go for progressive disease. So what happens? The stress increases, oxidative stress, increase angiotensin II, procalcific stimuli. So all this is going to cause calcification, and finally it may have hydroxyapatite nodule, cartilage, bone formation, will be a stiff valve with a full-blown severe aortic stenosis. So usually, normally itself above 65 years of age, you will see thickening and sclerosis of valve, which is in 50% of population. But in the 10 to 15%, they'll go to this sclerosis associated with, as we showed you in the previous slide, they may go for stenosis. Now, so what happens? This valve myofibroblast converts into osteoblasts, resulting in calcium hydroxyapatite deposition. All this is a part of your atherosclerotic propagation, atherosclerotic change. So there is a stiffening and narrowing of aortic valve for whatever cause. So now what is the compensatory changes which occurs is there is left ventricular hypertrophy. So how do you make out the left ventricular hypertrophy in your examination?
Shifted apex beat, ma'am.
So it will not be down, it will be out, fifth intercostal space. So whenever you see typically an aortic stenosis patient, it will be in the 2 centimeter or 1 centimeter lateral to the midclavicular line. That is what you will typically be finding. And what will be the nature of the apical impulse? Character of the apical impulse?
Heaving, ma'am.
Yeah, it will be heaving. How are you going to differentiate whether it is a heaving apical impulse or a hyperdynamic apical impulse?
Both duration and amplitude will be increased in heaving, ma'am.
Excellent. Yeah, it is a sustained. So both duration and amplitude is increased, whereas in hyperdynamic, it's an ill-sustained impulse. And this will be restricted to only one area, but hyperdynamic will be more than 2 to 3. In fact, you will be, in the clinics, you will be telling me, Madam, I could not make out where is exactly is the apical impulse when it is a hyperdynamic circulation. Whereas here, you can pinpoint and tell this is where the apical impulse is. Okay. So what happens because of this left ventricular hypertrophy? So one, there is a compression of coronary arteries, so decreased oxygen supply is there. Left ventricular hypertrophy per se will increase your myocardial oxygen demand. Because of this stenosis itself, the cardiac output is reduced. So this and this is going to cause ultimately myocardial ischemia and chest pain. So reduced cardiac output, how are we going to make out clinically? What will be the complaints?
Syncope, ma'am.
Oh, one is syncope,
Fatigue.
easy fatigability, because it is against a fixed output, no? It is a fixed cardiac output. So whenever there's exercise, fever, stress, or whatever it is, the cardiac output already low will be further low, and it may lead on to either syncope, as you said, exertional dyspnea, and fatigability. Now, all this leads to incomplete emptying of the left atrium. Now, left ventricle is pumping so minimally, you know. So what happens? This left atrium, there is incomplete. So this back pressure is going to cause pulmonary congestion, and this may lead on to right heart failure. Usually, the patient does not survive up to the right heart failure. Usually, by the time the syncope develops, only patient survives only for 1 year. But when does this sort of a thing happens is when you have a sudden severe stress, no, patient may land up with pulmonary edema. But the most common is your chest pain, syncope, and exertional dyspnea. Till right heart failure sets in, no, the patient does never survives. So the cardinal symptoms, usually we ask you a question, the cardinal symptoms of aortic stenosis. So you tell these three things: angina, syncope, and dyspnea. So angina is exertional angina due to the mismatch of myocardial oxygen demand supply ratio. Syncope because of this fixed cardiac output. So when there is increased exercise, there is a decreased cardiac output. And dyspnea, exertional dyspnea due to cardiac compensation. The earliest symptom, usually the earliest symptom to be picked out is your exercise intolerance. That is how it starts. Usually the patient will be asymptomatic from the onset of the pathological process to the symptoms 10 to 20 years. So if so most of the people usually die even at this stage of aortic sclerosis due to some other problems. So but there are few groups which may accelerate and progress to this stage. So this is one, you should, so the presence from onset of symptom, the survival is so limited, as you say, angina within 5 years, syncope within 2 years, and dyspnea, 3 years, and dyspnea within 2 years. So, so what is the take-home point or the lesson we should learn is any aortic stenosis patient who is symptomatic has to be aggressively managed. So now we told about the symptoms. Now we come to the sign. So pulses. So you have a, what will be the pulse? Will it be low volume or a large volume pulse or a normal volume pulse?
Low
No,
volume.
Yeah, it will be a small volume pulse. So initially when you see, patient will have a small volume pulse. So how do you confirm that it is a small volume, normal volume, or a large volume pulse?
Pulse pressure.
Yeah, seeing the pulse pressure. So here, so the presence of this pulsus parvus et tardus, that is slow raising with a late peaking and a late amplitude pulse. Now this occurs in severe aortic stenosis. Not all the patients you are going to get this typical finding of slow raising with a late peaking. If this is present, this itself indicates that the patient is having severe aortic stenosis. Normally what we'll see is, usually we see is when the small volume pulse, low volume pulse. Now We don't see this common because it's not very common to see this typical pulsus parvus retardus because intervention is done before that. And usually the BP usually is low. That is, there is a systolic decapitation. So usually it will be around 100 or 110, low, like that only. And of course, you'll have a narrow pulse pressure. And apical impulse, as we said, it will be either displaced laterally or initial stages when there is the hypertrophy, it may still be normal only. But it starts with heaving and a sustained apex. Now, when we go to auscultation, what are the points you're going to see? Auscultatory findings in aortic stenosis. Somebody can answer.
Ejection systolic murmur.
Okay, whenever we talk of sounds, we are going to talk which area, no?
Yes.
Which area you are talking now?
The
Tricuspid area, pulmonary area, aortic area.
aortic area, ma'am.
Yes, aortic area. Now, a few things like this will be relevant even in clinics. So, whenever you are going to auscultate, so even by the time you are up to palpation, you know that it is either a mitral valvular disease or a aortic valvular disease, or it's a combination or whatever it is. So, suppose if it's a mitral valvular disease or a predominantly mitral valvular disease, when you are going to auscultate, you can start your presentation with mitral, that is the mitral area, then you can come to tricuspid, then to the pulmonary, and then to aortic. You call it as a Z pattern. But suppose if it is a predominantly aortic involvement, you can start with the aortic area, then pulmonary area, then your second aortic area, then your tricuspid area, and then you can come to the mitral area. Now, there are a few things you should know. Suppose if the aortic valvular involvement is due to the bicuspid aortic valve, it is going to be a pure aortic lesion. Now, if it is due to rheumatic heart disease, invariably there will be some amount of mitral valvular involvement. Usually, aortic valve does not isolatedly get involved in rheumatic heart disease. Manifestation may be predominantly aortic manifestation, but even at least by echo wise, we will be able to make out few, that is mitral valvular changes in the form of thickening of the mitral valve. Usually, it is in the combination of the mitral valvular involvement. Okay, so when we are going to auscultate the aortic area, like in any other area of auscultation, first you will have to talk about the sounds, then you have to talk about the first heart sound, second heart sound, then you have to go to the extra added sounds which will be heard, and then you go to the murmurs. Now here, what will be the A2 like?
Loud, ma'am.
Yeah, so you get a loud A2 in rheumatic AS and a bicuspid AS. But if it is a sclerotic or atherosclerotic going for calcification in the late stage, A2 will be very soft. Now, then the next point is you may hear an ejection click when it is due to bicuspid aortic stenosis, but in other conditions you will not be able to get the clicks. So this is the sound. Then about the murmur, it is an ejection systolic murmur, that is crescendo decrescendo murmur, which starts with the S1, then it engulf of the aortic component of S2. When it is engulfing the aortic component, means it is becoming severer. A2 is becoming soft and the murmur is prolonged and it is engulfing the second heart sound, means that the aortic stenotic lesion is becoming severe. Then where will the radiation be?
To the carotids, ma'am.
Yeah, the carotids, and you can feel the carotid bruit also. So this will be your typical feature of the auscultatory finding. So when you talk about the murmur of AS, it is a medium pitched or loud, or you can say loud. It is a ejection systolic murmur. It's a crescendo decrescendo murmur with a late systolic attenuation, and there is a rough rasping murmur which has a musical quality when it is a flail murmur, and that is called a seagull murmur. It is best heard in a sitting position and end expiration. Usually all the left-sided events are better heard in expiration and all the right-sided events are better heard in inspiration, and usually best heard in aortic area. Which murmur is better heard in the second aortic area?
AR, ma'am. AR.
AR, yes, very good. AR murmur, which is valvular aortic regurgitant murmurs, will be better heard in the second aortic area. Okay, so you should remember. Now, what is this Gallaverdine phenomenon? It is this low-pitched murmur. It can radiate to apex, carotid. Sorry, this high-pitched murmur, when it radiates to apex, it is called the Gallaverdine phenomenon, and it is related to the duration and not the intensity. So that is when you auscultate, no, you'll be better hearing in the mitral area rather than in the aortic area, and you may mistake it as for mitral regurgitant lesion rather than aortic stenosis. This Gallaverdine phenomenon, usually in atherosclerotic heart disease, you can have this Gallaverdine phenomenon. So this is your mild stenosis. The gap is there. Here the gap is increasing, but what happens is the murmur is engulfing your second heart sound. So as the severity increases, the murmur, the length also increases, and it engulfs the second heart sound, and the second heart sound becomes softer. So this is the diagrammatic representation of what you are going to hear in auscultation. Then now you have diagnosed as aortic stenosis. Now you have to look for whether associated aortic regurgitant lesion is there, or you'll have to look for mitral valvular involvement. Especially in rheumatic heart disease, definitely you'll have to search for any mitral lesion. Now, one more thing, suppose if aortic stenosis is associated with mitral stenosis, what will happen? If there is AS and MS,
There'd be a mid-diastolic murmur as well, ma'am.
yeah, there'll be one mid-diastolic murmur of your MS, and which will be your predominant lesion, MS or AS?
MS, ma'am.
Yes, because already blood is so less, no? Whatever blood has to reach the left ventricle is less because of MS. Only though that little blood is going to go into the aortic, into aorta, into systemic circulation. So the aortic stenosis, stenotic lesion, no? Even though it is a severe aortic stenosis, we will not have any symptoms, and there will be no signs, and we may assume that aortic stenosis is mild and only mitral stenosis is severe. Now, why are we worried? When you are going for any surgical procedure, so you will have to either simultaneously go for mitral valve, whatever, either a procedure or a replacement, and aortic valve. Suppose you do first mitral and you leave aortic, what will happen? So obviously the aortic stenotic symptoms will become very severe, and already the compensation mechanism has not occurred of left ventricular hypertrophy. So the patient may suddenly collapse. So especially when mitral and aortic, should be very careful in assessing the severity before going for any surgical procedure. Now, when we go for investigations, we always talk about baseline investigations, and then we go for, of course, ECG, X-ray, echo. Now, I'll tell something about ECG. So, if you see the ECG, so whenever you look, okay, there are a lot of changes, abnormal changes. I'll show you only few relevant changes. Whenever you see a normal ECG, you have to look for, this is the T wave, this is the T wave, and this is the QRS. T, this is the QRS, and this is the T wave. Of course, here it is inverted, V2, AVL and all, it is inverted, but this is the normal. So, when you see in V5, the R wave is very tall, is it not? Seems to come up to V4. So, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 34 millimeters it is there. And when you see the R, this is R. In V1 and V2, it is very deep. That is 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, almost 25 plus 35. So, when do you say a patient is having left ventricular hypertrophy? If S in V1 or V2 plus R in V5 or V6 is more than 35 millimeter. So, obviously, there is a left ventricular hypertrophy. The next is you are going to see the T wave. See the T wave. See the T wave in V4, it is upright, whereas in V5 and V6, it has become inverted. Then next, when you see the ST T wave changes, there is a ST, sagging with a T wave inversion. So this patient, if you see this ECG, so you have a left ventricular hypertrophy and you have a strain pattern. This is a typical ECG pattern of your aortic stenosis. Then what are the radiographical? What is the X-ray picture? Usually any aortic stenosis, no, there will be post-stenotic dilatation of ascending aorta, which will be X-ray wise made out by this enlargement. Usually cardiac, how do you make out cardiomegaly in X-ray is, you take a transthoracic, maximum transthoracic diameter, and you will take a heart, the diameter, and if this is more than what? When do you call it as cardiomegaly?
More than 50%, ma'am.
More than 50%, you call it cardiomegaly. But here it is not so. So cardiomegaly has not yet occurred here in this X-ray. But actually, patient may be in a mild to moderate aortic stenosis. So cardiomegaly occurs only very late, not in mild stage when the compensation. So there is only a concentric hypertrophy. It is not yet become eccentric. So substantial cardiomegaly only after myocardial failure has ensued. That is by, and usually pulmonary venous hypertension and pulmonary edema occurs like when there is a decompensation, but usually it is not like mitral valvular disease. Here usually patient dies of aortic valvular disease before the pulmonary hypertension sets in. And sometimes aortic valvular calcification may be seen. Here it is not very clear, but may be seen, but readily seen in your CT finding. So now in echo, just for your thing, so when the transvalvular gradient more than 40 millimeter, peak flow velocity more, and this, you call it severe when aortic valvular area is less than 1 centimeter square. So what are the things? There are medical management and surgical management. So so the always medical management, the exertional dyspnea. So you have to avoid the strenuous exercise. Already it is a low cardiac output stage or a fixed cardiac output stage. And so if you use diuretic, you're further going to worsen. So it should be used with caution. ACE and ARPs are a good drug of choice. Beta blockers are contraindicated because already heart is so hypertrophied and functioning, you know. In usually what for angina and all, I always told you that beta blocker is the drug of choice. But in aortic stenosis, you have to be very careful when using beta blockers. Nitrates can be used for angina, but again you have to be used with caution because the sudden vasodilatation may worsen and precipitate shock, cardiogenic shock. Now, surgical management, there are a lot of surgical management, that is transthoracic aortic valve replacement, aortic balloon valvulotomy. So what is the indication? As he said, the presence of symptom, that is symptomatic aortic stenosis itself is one of the indications of surgery. Before doing the surgery, usually they do angio to find out if there is any coronary coexisting coronary artery disease. So if there is possibility of placing stents or they have to go for a CABG, it will be done in a single procedure. So when do you, so as I said, presence of symptom itself is an indication for surgery. So asymptomatic aortic stenosis, but if ejection fraction is low, because as I said, till late stage, because of good left ventricular hypertrophy, the ejection fraction will be maintained. But when you're going to do a routine investigation and find that the patient asymptomatic, in the sense patient is not aware, but mild exercise intolerance has started, and ejection fraction is less than 50%, means the patient is in an advanced state. So even though they are asymptomatic, they have to be intervened. And on yearly, asymptomatic, so they have to be early evaluated once in a year. So if there is increasing gradient, you get a clue that there is worsening. If it is a bicuspid aortic valvular involvement, and it is usually maximally they'll have to go for procedures, because the valve will not be calcified or stiff and all. They can go for this transcatheter aortic valve replacement. It's a very good thing. Now patient may be asymptomatic. Now patient is symptomatic, asymptomatic or symptomatic with low ejection fraction. If the ejection fraction is very low, they say no role of surgery. But if you do a dobutamine stress echo, and in a patient with severe aortic stenosis, the LV dysfunction is not so bad. That is, when you give a stress, the output increases. So these patients can be taken up for surgery. or we have to differentiate. This it's not very much important for you. So to differentiate LV dysfunction is either due to aortic stenosis or due to other causes. So if it is mild AS, ejection fraction is low because of other causes. If you do a surgery, you are going to get a very good outcome. So this ends about the aortic stenosis. Now we are going to go for aortic regurgitation. Now what are the, so we already know the anatomy of aortic valve, where there is leaflets and annulus. So these two things. So what are the causes of aortic regurgitation?
Due to left ventricular dilatation, ma'am.
So it can be that, otherwise root dilatation, one, yes. It can either be a,
Syphilis, ma'am.
what
Syphilis.
doctor? Yeah, what did you say?
Syphilis, ma'am.
Syphilis, very good. So that is because of the root involvement, aortitis, aortic root dilatation, or it can be due to valvular involvement. So root involvement, one, as he already pointed out, syphilis. What are the other causes where you can have root dilatation?
Mycotic aneurysm.
Okay, very good. Mycotic aneurysm. Okay.
Marfan syndrome.
Marfan syndrome. What else? Okay, valvular.
Rheumatic heart disease, no?
Okay, very good. Rheumatic heart disease, bicuspid aortic valve. Then what are the other ones?
Connective tissue disorder.
Okay, very good. Connective tissue disorder. Then fever, anemia, splenomegaly. Fever, cardiac condition, fever, what?
Infective endocarditis.
Yes, yes. Okay. So here, again, we are talking this normal, left atrium, left ventricle, aorta. So here, what is happening? The blood goes into the high pressure area, and what happens? The whole blood is going to regurgitate back. Now the difference between aortic regurgitation and mitral regurgitation is, when in mitral regurgitation, the blood from left ventricle will regurgitate into left atrium, which is a low pressure area. Here it is going to regurgitate into a high pressure area. So each time the stroke volume is going to raise, because so much blood is going to pour in from left atrium, you're going to have so much blood. So with this background, so this abnormal aortic valve fails to close, allowing the blood to leak backward. It can be either because of annulus or because of the valve per se. So now you have to hear this acute AR and chronic AR. Acute AR, there are few causes, and chronic AR, there are few causes. Acute AR, now when you saw the previous slide, here the left ventricle is basically normal, and when an acute AR occurs in a normal left ventricle, there is no compensatory mechanism which has occurred. So any patient who has this aortic dissection, what happens is this aortic dissection may go up to the root, and it may cause acute aortic regurgitation. Now left ventricle is normal, so the left ventricular end diastolic volume pressure increases, end diastolic systolic pressure is going to rise. So what happens? The compensatory mechanism is not there. So sudden, the patient goes very fast for cardiogenic shock and sudden cardiac death. Acute AR is one condition where you cannot medically treat. It has to have an emergency surgical involvement. Then of course your infective endocarditis may present as acute AR when the cardiac, the valve and the heart was basically normal, and you have a severe infective endocarditis. Then this prosthetic valve dysfunction due to any cause is going to cause acute AR, and it is now these are all then rupture of an aortic valve leaflet, example trauma. So these are, you have to be very alert about this, because the patient will go for a cardiogenic shock and sudden death unless intervened early. So unless you look for it in these conditions, acute AR is a very, life-threatening condition. Usually a bicuspid or a supravalvular stenosis suspect if isolated lesion in a chronic presentation. In a chronic presentation, always think of bicuspid, though the signs may not be there. This is about the chronic AR. Now, chronic AR, the causes, one is old age atherosclerotic, that is calcific degeneration. It can be a root dilatation, or it can be a rheumatic fever with the previous or infective endocarditis, Now, other rare causes are connective tissue disease like Marfan's, Ehlers-Danlos, then your autoimmune disease like rheumatoid arthritis, SLE, ankylosing spondylitis, syphilis, and drugs, which can cause aortic regurgitation. Now, what happens? What is the pathophysiology? So, there is a regurgitant volume load, there is increased volume load. So, what is the compensatory mechanism which occurs? There is increase in left ventricular dilatation as well as hypertrophy. Why dilatation? Because so much amount of blood is entering the left ventricle. So, there is a left ventricular diastolic volume is going to increase. There is increase in, so it is an eccentric hypertrophy. So, the LV hypertrophy will be concentric and eccentric because of the stimulated LV afterload. So, what will be the apical impulse in aortic regurgitation?
Downwards and outwards.
Yes, it will be in fact in the seventh intercostal space, 3 to 4 centimeter, almost up to the anterior axillary line. And if you post-mortem, when they see the heart and all, it may almost weigh up to 1 kg. That much amount of hypertrophy, that is eccentric and concentric hypertrophy occurs because of so much amount of blood is regurgitated back and then again it is pumped. Now, so what is the effect is these compensating mechanisms maintain a relatively low left ventricular end diastolic pressure. There is an adequate stroke volume and cardiac output. So till the end it tries to maintain the adequate stroke volume and a sufficient coronary perfusion pressure. Now this goes on for a long time. So patient will be asymptomatic. So basically in aortic valvular disease, usually the compensatory mechanism is so good that they'll be asymptomatic for a long period of time. So the onset of the symptom itself is a severe decompensation, and it is actually showing that the patient is becoming, the patient is in a very advanced stage. The onset of symptom indicates an advanced stage. That is the importance. So, what will be the, because of this so much increased stroke volume, with the rapid regurgitation, what is the pulse, typical pulse of aortic regurgitation?
Collapsing pulse.
Yeah, collapsing pulse. Why do you get that collapsing pulse? Is because of so high stroke volume and the rapid runoff. Then, what happens to the blood pressure in aortic regurgitation?
Wide pulse pressure.
Yeah, there will be a large pulse pressure. If you see the systolic BP, it will be 180. And diastolic, even up to 0, the Karakorov sounds will be heard. So this high will be the pulse pressure in your aortic regurgitation. Now, after a certain stage, the decompensation starts setting in. So there is steadily increasing regurgitant volume load, further ventricular dilatation. So wall stress increases, and it is after certain stage the hypertrophy does not occur. So at this stage there is a contractile dysfunction. So ejection fraction goes down, your stroke volume start coming down, your cardiac output is coming down, and what we said, this compensatory mechanism is able to maintain the left ventricle ejection end diastolic pressure. So this is the time when the features of congestive heart failure starts appearing, and you will get the exertional dyspnea, angina, all these features. So this angina maybe because of this hypertrophy, not due to coronary artery disease. In fact, even without coronary artery disease, the patient starts developing angina because of reduced coronary perfusion. Now, the symptoms of acute and the chronic AR is different. In acute aortic regurgitation, there is sudden severe shortness of breath, chest pain, rapidly progressive pulmonary edema, acute decompensated heart failure, cardiogenic shock. So if you see even one case of aortic dissection, you'll realize that this occurs in such rapid, in a short time frame, and patient collapses very early. Now, in chronic AR, what we commonly see, in rheumatic heart disease or atherosclerotic, then the compensation, there is time for compensatory. The patients are asymptomatic for 10 to 15 years. But the first presenting feature will be palpitation. So why palpitation? Because of so much amount of hypertrophy. So they'll be aware of their own heartbeat, that unpleasant awareness, that is what we call as palpitation. Now in such a patient, onset of arrhythmia will cause death in a patient with a chronic AR. And angina, as I said, angina is here will be not due to coronary artery disease, but because of the hypertrophy. and exertional dyspnea, congestive cardiac failure, or they may present with acute pulmonary edema. As we said, the onset of symptom itself means that the patient is an advanced disease. So now, because of this wide pulse pressure, this high output, so we have all the head to foot peripheral signs. Now, this is what we always ask in your exams. No, if AS-AR case there, surely it's going to be kept as a long case or a short case. So, what is Corrigan's sign? It is a prominent carotid and supraclavicular pulsation. De Musset sign is head nodding with the heartbeat. Landolfi's. Now, all this is very important, so I'm just repeating so that you should know it. You all know, but you should know it. That is change in pupil size with heartbeat. Muller sign is your uvula pulsation. Becker sign is retinal artery pulsation. Rosenbach sign is your liver pulsation. Gerhardt sign, splenic pulsation. Quincke sign, there is a digital capillary pulsation, alternating blanching in the nail bed. Then Lighthouse sign, blanching and flushing of the forehead. Trop sign, that is pistol shot murmur, that is systolic and diastolic booming sound over femoral artery. Durosia sign, that is when you to and fro the femoral artery, no? So when you compress with the bell of the stethoscope, you'll be here. Hill sign is important for assessing the severity of aortic regurgitation. So any patient with cardiovascular system, you have to take BP of all the 4 limbs. Okay, so that is very important, and especially in aortic valvular lesions. Then water hammer pulse, that is your collapsing pulse. Then this and all, Lincoln sign, Sherman sign, and all are rare signs, but the above signs you should all know. So when we come for, peripheral signs we spoke about, you know about the apical impulse we spoke. And again, like in bicuspid aortic valve, you can have both AS with AR. And in rheumatic heart disease, you can have AR. When there is a severe AR, you may have because of flow murmur, you can have the features of systolic murmur. Pure severe AR also can cause systolic murmur. Now, what is pulsus bisvariance? Pulsus bisvariance. What condition you will get?
Severe aortic regurgitation.
One in severe aortic regurgitation, then?
Combined AS and AR.
Yeah, combined AS with AR, you can get a bicuspid aortic valve. Bicuspid, AS with AR. So you can get this bisvariance, pulsus bisvariance, or the collapsing pulse. So you should know everything about AR. AR is a very common case which will be kept for your clinics. And usually, as I already told you, if there is a rheumatic heart disease as an etiology for AR, definitely mitral valvular involvement also will be there. So the auscultatory finding will be your soft S1, A2 will be soft with the eject. So whenever we talk about, again I said no about the sounds, then the added sounds, and then the murmur. What murmur will you get in aortic regurgitation?
Early diastolic murmur.
Yeah, so early diastolic murmur, which will be a decrescendo murmur. Why it is decrescendo is it is from the high pressure region, it is regurgitating back into the left ventricle. So you get a decrescendo nature of a early diastolic murmur. So the sounds will be A2 will be soft. If it is a valvular involvement, it is because of that because of this regurgitation is better heard in the second aortic area. But if it is an aortic root dilatation, it is heard in the aortic area. So A2 will be soft, rheumatic MR, but whereas in syphilitic AR is one condition where you get a loud ringing tambour-like sound, and associated with S3 gallop because of so much blood which rushes in. And S4 is prominent because of left ventricular hypertrophy. The aorta has to, the atria has to pump against the increase because of the increased left ventricular hypertrophy. So S4 also is a sign of severe AR. So the murmur in AR is an early diastolic murmur which starts immediately after A2. It's a high-pitched, blowing, loudest in the left sternum, that is the second aortic area. It is decrescendo in nature, best heard in the end of expiration in sitting and leaning forward position, and the duration correlates with AR. The more the severe AR, the more long will be the early diastolic murmur. It may be musical, that is cooing doe murmur, which signifies there is perforation, or whatever it is which is going to vibrate will cause a musical nature of the murmur. So this is your, this I don't think we'll go through. Then what is this Austin Flint murmur?
Functional mitral stenosis murmur. It's a
Yes.
it's a mid-diastolic murmur that happens because regurgitant jet hits the
Anterior mitral leaflet. Usually it occurs only in acute AR. In chronic AR, you're not going to see this thing. So it's a low-pitched mid-diastolic murmur. It's a DD for your mitral stenosis, but here it is because this AR jet impinges on the anterior mitral leaflet, forcing it down and reducing it is not a functional. So the turbulence caused by AR jet meets the mitral inflow jet, and you may have that fluttering and cause. Now this is very rare. Okay, it's not so common. First, acute AR patient will be so sick that to identify this is a very difficult thing. Okay. Now, how do you know the severity of AR? I think it's a very standard question we are going to ask you in all the clinics. Duration of murmur. The longer the murmur, the severe. The presence of disvariance. S3, your Hill sign. How do you classify mild, moderate, severe by Hill sign? Anybody? You take a lower limb BP and a upper limb BP. Okay. Normally it is less than 20, the difference. If it is 20 to 40, mild, 40 to 60, moderate, and more than 60, the systolic blood pressure difference, it is severe. So that is the Hill sign. So you can assess the severity of AR. Then cardiomegaly, then your Austin Flint murmur, soft A2, and if there is a marked peripheral signs. So here the heart will be so much enlarged. You will have the big enlarged heart. No, I told you the transthoracic and this, the cardiac diameter, this looks more bigger than your, more than half. So almost it is covering your 2/3 of your thorax. Whereas in acute AR, what is this? Some back wing. This is your back wing appearance. There is some haziness here and here. So this shows what?
pulmonary edema.
Pulmonary edema. But heart is still normal. Now, do you see this inner line and there seems to be outer line? Can you see it? So this is your shadow within the shadow. Where do you get shadow within the shadow?
Left atrial enlargement.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so this is an acute, but you remember this is the back wing appearance. What you're seeing in a chronic case, you have this nice cardiomegaly which you're seeing. So medical management, and of course it is the surgical management. So the medical management is very limited. You give vasodilators like ACE and ARBs are the mainstay. Given in selective cases, you can give diuretics. So ACE airby, we try to maintain the systolic BP around 140. So that is what we'll aim when we are giving vasodilators. This sodium nitroprusside is only in acute emergency. Okay, but what happens is the ejection fraction will further decrease. So you should be very careful. Okay, so the management is very much limited. So the main surgical management, it is aortic valve replacement surgery. So it can either be surgical or it can be percutaneous, depends on what is the stage. So as I said, the onset of symptom indicates that some intervention has to take place. And here again, because of the large stroke volume, ejection fraction will be normal. So in an asymptomatic patient with the ejection fraction of less than 55, this is, in fact, you and me, 55%, nobody is going to be bothered. But in the aortic regurgitation, this itself indicates the patient is decompensating very fast. Now, asymptomatic ejection fraction is normal, but if there is LV dilatation, that itself is an indication that surgery has to be done. And like when do you do, like in acute condition, you have to go for surgical procedure, especially in infective endocarditis patient with acute severe aortic regurgitation. And suppose you have a coronary artery disease and you're planning for a CAPG, we'll have to look for you have to look for ascending aorta and other cardiac valves. So I think with this exhaustive class what we had, I think I thank you all. So any doubts?
Ma'am,